as being a peacemaker. You know, God equips us to be peacemakers. And we had a study on peacemakers of God is to bring peace, particularly between God and man. But we also work on our individual relationships to have peace there. So from the wisdom literature, we can learn about things we don't want to be and do, and we can also learn about things that we do want to do and be. So being angry in and of itself, a couple of points I want to make in the outset. Being angry in and of itself is not a sin. God has noted it many times as being angry, but we know that God is without sin. So Ephesians 4:26 says, being angry, but do not sin. So there is a way to be angry and to control that and moderate that anger in a way that is not sinful. But we also learn from James 1:19 and 20 that the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And I find this true in myself, that when I'm angry, I am much more likely to say and do things that I'm not proud of later and do not reflect well on God and that are frankly sinful. And so, one of my goals is I'm much better off just not being angry, and so I try to find ways to avoid that. There is a righteous anger over things that are sinful, and we should have some emotional attention toward those things, but it is easy even when the object of our anger is appropriate. There's something about the anger of man that I may not exhibit that, and I may not exercise that anger in a way that is righteous. I may go too far. And one of the examples for myself, I think of Jesus overthrowing the tables of the money changers in the temple. And I thought many times, could I go to that degree of driving people out of a building and not go too far? And I'm not sure that I could. So there's sometimes situations that are unrighteous, need to be handled. There may be situations with certain individuals that may be difficult to handle, and maybe I'm not the right person. Sometimes I'm not the right person. Sometimes there are aspects of relationships that there's history, there are past influences that make me maybe not the wisest person to try to be the one that primarily engages in that situation. And we need to be open enough to recognize that. We still need to be growing and trying to become a person that would be the right person. But sometimes we may need to punt. We may need to call in someone else that has more influence in that situation to help us with that or to take over that situation. Again, we don't ignore things that are wrong, but we have to have wisdom in how we apply those things. So I just want to say, those kind of few things is in the outset of our study, and then we'll turn to some more specific questions. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of set those as boundaries that are established in other parts of the Bible as we start studying about what the Proverbs say about anger and strife. And as has been pointed out by other speakers and teachers, that the Proverbs speak in generalities. They're not always true in every situation. There are situations where they are not true, and because of the nature of Proverbs. And so we need to temper our interpretations of the Proverbs with things that are said elsewhere in Scriptures to make sure that we draw the appropriate conclusions from those. So, broken this study down into three kind of categories that relate to anger and strife. And the first one is looking at the character and the consequences of someone who is a person of anger and strife. We're not really dealing here with someone that, maybe gets angry over something and doesn't sin about it infrequently. That's not really what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a person that potentially is given to anger and strife. It is something that boils up in them on maybe a frequent basis and maybe to an extreme that does damage to relationships and other things. So that's kind of the person that we're going to be thinking of when we're thinking about the character and consequences of a person of anger and strife. And so what I sent out, I asked you to come up with some traits and characteristics and of a person that is given to anger and strife. And the concept here is that things that I am prone to sin in do not tend to be single isolated traits. There often is a package of character qualities that are defective in me in the areas that I am prone to sin in. And by the same token, it is usually not one counteractive trait that frees me from that vice, but usually it is a suite of traits that work together to overcome a particular vice. And so what I'm asking here is, if you look at the verses that were in the handout, or if you have others that you think are helpful in this area, when the Proverbs speak of a person that is given to anger and strife, what other terms are used to describe that person? What other things go with being a person of anger or strife? Did anybody come up with some things to offer there, Steve?
Pride is the first thing that came to my mind.
Okay. Pride. That's a good one. Which one? Foolish. Okay. I was kind of, I don't know, surprised, but recognized as I was going through these that the person that is given to anger is multiple times is described as a foolish person or a fool. And so if we're not controlling our anger, then the Bible describes us as a fool. And is that something we want to be? Do you have a particular verse in mind, Scott, that?
Chapter 20, verse 2 says, "The terror of a king is like the growling of a lion. He who provokes him to anger forfeits his own life."
Okay.
And, the side note, it just says sins against his own life. That's another way of saying it.
Okay.
You could look at that as a foolish thing to do.
Yeah.
But there probably are, and we have examples of people who did provoke kings to anger. But
Yeah.
for us, generally, we would
Not very smart. Yeah, Andy?
I think the very next verse, verse 3 says that the foolish will be quarreling.
Yeah.
Proverbs 23.
Okay.
And then chapter 14:17 also taxes foolishness.
Okay. Yeah, so chapter 20 and 3, 14, 17, talks about someone acting foolishly. 14:29 talks about exalting folly, the angry person, and 12:16 just describes, them as a fool. The vexation of a fool is the English Standard Version, and the vexation means anger, and the word that's used there means anger or wrath. Their fool is known, the vexation of a fool. So, person that has unregulated anger is thus a fool.
I think
Nathan?
selfishness plays a big part in your anger, because you're always looking to be right.
Okay.
You want to, always be dominant over another person, so that always comes down to side of
Okay.
your anger.
So so anger brings out that sense of domination or wanting to put the other person down or make them look bad, and that may tie in with the being proud as well. So very good.
Angry
DC?
person has a tendency to look at everything in a negative way than looking at things in a positive way. They see curses, they don't see blessings.
Okay, so an angry person tends to look at things in a negative way. That's part of why they get angry, I think, and is that they see things as being negative, and that may or may not be appropriate, but that can lead to anger. Any others, Jeff?
Angry person is an instigator. Proverbs 29:22, a man of wrath stirs up strife. The one given to anger causes much transgression. So the anger is not isolated to the person who is angry. It is outward.
Okay, so very good. So the angry person, the person who's given to anger and strife, is an instigator. He leads other people to get engaged as well in whatever is making them angry, and so they have a negative influence on other people. That is their nature.
I just
Yeah.
think that they're gonna be a repeat offender.
Okay.
In 1919, if you're friends with an angry man, you're gonna have to save him, and he's gonna do it again, you're gonna have to save him again. The nature,
Okay.
especially what we're considering here is not someone who got angry one time, but an angry person who has this habit, and so it's going to come up again.
Yeah. So there's going to be, that mentions that the angry person is a repeat offender because it is a vice for them, and it's going to come up over and over again. 1919. I looked at the same verse, and I used the concept of their unlearning. It could be another way to look at that. They don't learn from the experience. They dig themselves into a hole for their anger, or they get in trouble for it, but then they do it again. They don't learn from that experience. And so, Mark?
Political verses and concepts that have been put forward already too. Somebody that is driven by their anger as a fool is also supposed to be driven by emotion. If they're not in control,
Okay.
they're being controlled by others.
Okay, so the angry person is being driven by emotions, and I think that I want to come back to that at later discussions as well, as we think about the underlying things that lead to it. So that is important, that it is an emotional event, activity, and emotions can be difficult to control. Steve? Okay. Okay. Okay, very good. So Steve mentions that the scriptures describe a person that they lack self-control. They're not slow to anger. They are quick to anger, which again shows a lack of self-control, which is important for a Christian to be exhibiting. So yeah, very good. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and shift to the next area, if that's okay, and unless someone has a burning trait, just so we can make some progress. And on the other hand, someone who tends to show restraint from anger and strife, someone who can control their emotions, are applauded in the wisdom literature. And I'm curious as to what other positive traits did you find in the passages for someone who is able to show restraint from anger and strife? See? They're kind of tied, right? Uh-huh. Okay. So the person that is able to overcome being a person of anger or strife is going to be someone that is slow to anger. And so they are going to have self-control. So those are positive traits, Mark.
Also tied to wisdom, one of the verses I was looking at was 29:11.
29:11.
Which is a fool gives full vent to the spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back.
Okay. 29:11. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds back. So being able to have self-control, being able to hold back, work with our emotions is a positive trait that helps us to be preventive. It helps us to not fall victim to being angry and then sinning. That's an important thing. So others? Thanks. Sorry, Mary. 28 and 25. Okay. So 28:25 describes the contrast to someone that is given to strife as a greedy man, which is actually another one of the traits of the negative traits. Being greedy may lead to anger and strife. But one who trusts in the Lord will be enriched is a contrast to that person that stirs up strife. So, again, trusting in the Lord could involve a whole range of activities and traits that are preventive from being a person of anger. Jeff?
1429, whoever is slow to anger has great understanding.
Okay.
Kind of discernment and wisdom.
Okay.
I think that could be cause and effect, that you are slow to anger because you have understanding, and your slowness in anger leads to.
Okay. So 1429, Jeff mentions, is that it's associated with being a person of understanding, and being a person of understanding may help to prevent us from being angry. So yeah, that's a good one. What else, Matt?
Proverbs 12:16 says he can ignore an insult, and 15:1 he can give that soft answer to turn away wrath. And
Okay.
those are things that angry man just has a hard time with.
Yeah. Okay. And the first one you said again was the.
That was 12:16, and it says something about ignoring an insult.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So 12:16, being able to ignore an insult, and then 15:1 describes being able to give a soft answer, which can turn away wrath. So ignoring an insult, giving soft answers are traits of those that are able to avoid not get caught up in the sin of anger and strife. And as I was looking through these, and it kind of shows in a comment that I put in a later section of the class, is that a lot of these traits that fit in with the person who's slow to anger and able to control anger, a lot of these are fruit of the Spirit. And so if we go to Galatians 5, 20 through 22, and the love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, all those traits, those are a package deal. They work, they coordinate with one another, they build with one another, and having the suite of those traits makes us much more powerful, more invulnerable to the things that would lead us to, in this case, be quick to anger and be strongly associated with strife. Others? Norm?
I feel like I need to throw this out here.
Sure.
Somebody's been in this category before. Some of us need a little food. We've got, we're feeling part of it sometimes. We've got a little bit of chemical imbalance or something like
Okay.
that. We've got either had a trauma happen to us, or we've just got certain genes from,
Uh-huh.
sometimes we gotta get a little bit of help, get that chemical stuff, straightened out a little bit, so we can maybe do a better job of doing about it.
Okay. Okay, so Norm brings up the observation that sometimes it may be more challenging for some of us because of biological or historic events in our life. And I think those are true. Those are some things that actually we want to spend a little bit of time dealing with if we have enough time. But, things, mental illnesses can be associated with a lack of self-control. And sometimes those can, and I just make the observation that a lot of those traits can be improved, if not fully corrected. They can be improved by dwelling on biblical principles of what our character should be like. And there's a lot related to cognitive therapy. That's part of the toolkit of most psychologists, where they try to help people think properly about situations, and that helps their ability to cope with those situations. And sometimes, we get angry because we have difficulty coping. In some cases, that might be a situation that requires some medical attention, and I think that psychiatric care, mental illness, those are medical conditions, and sometimes those do need medication. And Norm also brings up that sometimes we've experienced things that make it easy for anger to be triggered. And and the point we'll make later on, and kind of toward the end, is that there can be a just reason for being angry, as we've already brought out. God gets angry about some things, but God responds properly in a non-sinful way. Responding in a sinful way is never acceptable. The fact that we've had trauma or other circumstances that make us susceptible does not justify that, but it does help us have understanding of ourselves and help us to understand other people, and it may make it easier for us or even a professional person to help people in those situations overcome that history that makes it a challenge for them. And so we do have to work together, and being understanding of what makes us tick is really important in this process. And so listening and trying to understand is really important. Okay, Mary? And please speak loudly because there's some distance between us. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So Mary points out that if we're dealing with someone that's in these situations that we were just describing, well, lots of times we don't know what we don't know. And so listening and trying to understand is important, and we need to show them patience and loving kindness in dealing with their situation. And those I think fit under some of these categories of the high qualities that people that can avoid anger and strife, they have these qualities. That's why they're able to be slow to anger, is because they have understanding. They know, we recognize that we don't know what we don't know, and so we need to be listening. We need to be finding out what's going on with the other person. What's the right way to deal with this? And that's part of the suite of traits that makes us less vulnerable to anger and outbursts and strife, and also makes us a better candidate to be helping people with that. Austin?
I think anger is a complex topic because there's not solve it all. But in Proverbs, you see a lot of the fool and the wise man compared. And the fool usually has his mouth open, and the wise man has his mouth closed.
Okay.
And you don't really struggle with anger until you have Oliver and you went sleeping for multiple months. And I spent more time with my mouth closed than ever before because it was my only way to work through it until I could get to sleep.
Yeah.
Eventually be able to process that.
Okay. Austin brings out that anger is a complex topic, and I agree with that. There can be a number of sources for it, and trying to deal with it either personally or with other people requires a lot of understanding. But he makes the observation as a generality is that the Proverbs make a lot of contrast between the wise person and the fool, and part of those contrasts, the fool generally has his mouth open and the wise man generally has his mouth closed. And so I think that's a pretty accurate observation. He mentions that it took some periods of stress and fatigue to actually help teach him how to deal better with anger. And lots of times that's true. We don't learn how to deal with adversity in a life of comfort and ease. It just doesn't work. And so we need to embrace some of the difficulties that we face as learning tools of God. The Lord chastens us. He disciplines us. He trains us through the adversity that we face. And we've had a number of lessons recently about Job and things like that help bring that out. Steve, did you see your hand?
Yeah, several years ago, I read a book dealing with humility and patience, and it brought out the point that...
Is it for it or against it? Okay, humility and patience. Okay, good. Thumbs up. Okay, good.
And it made the point that when we are angry or someone is angry, they are at their most vulnerable.
Okay.
Because they are out of control, as several of the points I've already made in the Proverbs.
Yeah.
So if we can be a conduit to help them cull that anger, then we protect them potentially from being more foolish and give them opportunity to regain their composure, and the relationship and the strife is lessened to a great degree.
Yeah. Okay.
It's the fact that when I'm angry, or when you're angry, we're at our most vulnerable. That has helped me a lot to just allow God to calm me.
Okay. Very good. So Steve said you read a book a while back, and one of the points of that book was that when people are angry, they're at their most vulnerable. If I'm angry, I'm at my most vulnerable. That's when I'm not going to really channel God that much, usually. I start thinking about my own interest in defending myself and promoting what I need, and that's not a good and a rational time often. And it is emotional. Emotions they can be our friend, but our emotions can also be one of our greatest enemies. And so that's a learning process. And so he also mentioned that that's where giving a soft answer, the Proverbs 15:1, being able to give a soft answer in response to other people's anger, we may be helping them when they're in their most vulnerable time by giving them a conduit to, okay, I de-escalated what you've escalated. I've de-escalated it because I've given you a soft answer. I've expressed something of trying to understand where you are, and that gives that person some protection and opportunity to change the direction that they're going. So good thoughts, practical applications. Mark?
Isn't so much BCD as it is general observation.
Yeah, I was expecting some of both, but I put the BCV in there so we could maximize that. So, but anyway, go ahead.
9 times out of 10, yes, I'm making up a number to go with that. Anger is not the core emotion. And as we're talking about these things of qualities associated with restraint, positive qualities associated with restraint, can be contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
If you're feeling that anger, especially if you're feeling it on a continuous basis, I'll use Austin as an example since he brought that up. He knew he wasn't getting sleep, he knew he wasn't getting rest, he knew he wasn't having time. I believe the phrase you used was to process those emotions. A lot of times, the anger is not what is at the base of it. The anger is our response to whatever is at the base of it. A lot of times, it can be grief, it can be sadness, it can be exhaustion, it can be any number of things that are what are actually behind it. And by not allowing that anger to take control and control the response, and I'm talking to myself here right now too, you can take time to stop and process and go, okay, wait a minute, what is it I'm actually upset about? I'm not angry that I stepped on the leg that your kids left out. I'm not angry that the car didn't start like it was supposed to. I'm not angry that this person that's driving on the road is going 5 miles under the speed limit when I'm already running late. What is it I'm actually feeling that is the outlet that I'm taking? And if you just constantly explode every time you feel that anger, you're never going to get that underlying issue and actually be able to come to any resolution. This goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about as far as it continuing to happen and other things tied into it and everything else. But if you take the time to stop, to process, and to work through where those emotions are actually coming from, you oftentimes can get to a place where not only is that element itself not at least as much of an issue anymore, but you might be able to resolve it.
Okay, good observation. So Mark commenting that anger often is not the core emotion or concern that sometimes because of its manifestations is what we see the most. And we're going to get into we want to spend a little bit more time in that specific area, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'll just make this comment related to that is that, and I had some opportunity to do some mediation training at work, and when you're trying to mediate conflict, the most important thing you can do in mediating that conflict is to define the question behind the question. Okay, so there's what appears to be the conflict, there's what appears to be superficially the question that two parties are bartering about, or arguing over, or maybe getting upset or angry about, or they're trying to get control of. But often what they say is the issue is not really the true issue. It may be what they perceive the issue is, but if we keep asking the question, why, or what then, what next, why is that important to you, and we keep digging deeper and deeper, excuse me, we often find that the real issue is something that wasn't obvious to begin with at all. And that issue is going to evoke a variety of emotions that are poorly defined in our minds often because we're not often very self-aware. And that is where the conflict, the strife, the anger goes. And so defining what the underlying causes are is extremely important. And that's actually one of the last sections we wanted to get into, but you've brought that to front, and I think that's a really important area to delve into because that's where we get understanding, and understanding is the key to resolving the issues that underlie anger and conflict and strife. So appreciate you bringing those up. So in this part about the positive traits or character qualities, I'm going to throw out a few that I had. The person that is able to avoid anger and strife is also described as prudent. In 12:16, other versions describe prudent as wise, astute, smart, sharp. They are a person of understanding, I think was mentioned. The person that is able to show restraint from anger and strife is described as having a tranquil heart in verses 14-30. They are a person of internal peace. Am I a person of internal peace? That's a fruit of the Spirit, and it goes with love and joy, peace, patience, kindness. So anyway, this person also is able to turn away wrath by giving a soft answer, 15:1. They're also described as giving soft answers or quiets contention in 15:18. So this person, this word's not used, but we could call them a peacemaker. Which is a phrase that we've studied here in depth not too long ago. The person that is able to show restraint from anger and strife is described in 16:32 as really being more powerful than a warrior. It says that this is a person that is slow. A person is slow to anger rules their spirit. They're greater than the mighty. They're stronger than the person that takes a city. So there is fortitude and strength in this person. They show good sense by being slow to anger in verses 19-11. Glory, and this is mentioned, it is a glory to them to overlook an offense. They are able to let some things go. We don't have to respond to everything that comes our way. We can let some things go, and sometimes we're not real good about that, and we need to ask, why can I let some things go? I have to respond to everything that comes my way, and then in some cases respond in an inappropriate way. The person that's able to do this deserves respect, and they receive honor. The English Revised Version says it uses the term that they avoid strife in chapter 20 and verse 3. Okay, so anyway, those are a number. Some of those are repeat some of the ones you mentioned, but there's a lot of positive things said about the person who is able to control their anger and avoid strife. That's a high character quality in God's eyes and in the wisdom of Solomon and others that wrote in the book. Ask what consequences follow a person of anger or strife? This person that can't control things, what does their life look like? And I'm just going to throw out a few things so that we can move forward. But in 12:16 it says that they are known at once. The fool in their wrath is known at once. So they're going to have a reputation. So being an angry person, being a person that's in conflict a lot, it's going to affect their reputation. A person with a quick temper is going to have foolish actions in 14:17. And this is a person that's connected with someone who plots evil, and that person is hated. Okay, so we're going to be disliked by other people based on those activities. Harsh words stir up anger, which implies that there's going to be conflict around them in 15:1. One that was very picturesque to me in 17:14, it says, the beginning of strife is like the letting out of water. The beginning of strife is like the letting out of water. And so it says, so quit before the quarrel breaks out. And the idea here is, from at least some commentators, is like having a little hole in a dam. Once the water starts coming out, it's going to make the hole bigger and bigger very quick, and suddenly you got a flood. So it says, quit from the strife while you can still put a finger in it, right? When it's small, that's when you got to stop it, because it's like water flooding. Once it gets out, it's going to cause a lot of damage. So that's one of the consequences. In 1819, it indicates that anger and strife separate relations. It says, a brother offended is unyielding as a strong city, and quarreling is like the bars of a castle. If we want to face other people that are stubbornly resistant to us in our lives, then if we continually show anger and strife toward them, that's what we're going to build up. That's what their response is eventually going to be. We're going to find ourselves barred out and isolated because of our actions. And then we've mentioned that they pay penalties repeatedly, 19:9, because they don't learn. So from all of that, well, to me, a key point is recognizing that whether the positive traits or the negative traits are being looked at, they are not isolated traits. I would like to suggest that we are building up a pattern of behavior and thinking and values, and this is brought out in 2 Peter 1 in verses 5 through 11, where we're adding the Christian graces, add to your faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, and so on. For if these be in you and abound, they will make you that you're neither barren nor unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We need this suite of character traits that represent Galatians 5:20-22, the fruit of the Spirit. And we see in the Proverbs, the person that's able to show restraint has a number of other positive qualities, and those interact and build on each other. We can't just focus on one thing and expect to be a person that doesn't have any anger, but yet we don't have any love or joy or peace in our lives. If we don't have any of those traits, it's going to be hard to avoid being a person maybe of anger or other vices. So, and as we allow these vices to remain in us, they're going to counteract the positive things we're trying to develop. And they're going to grow. We're going to have more vices that come from that. So to me, one of the things that came out of this is looking that we've got to choose the direction of our life and what character qualities, who we're going to serve, really. And we've got to pursue that wholeheartedly. And either we're going to be pursuing light and God and Jesus and their character traits, or we're going to be pursuing Satan and darkness. And they build on one another. So encourage us to pursue the godly things and the light that will help us to be fruitful in those areas. I think we only got a minute or so. I'm going to just summarize a couple of things here. So ask about what treatment should I expect as a person of anger or strife? And 14:17 indicates that the person with those traits is often hated. We're going to experience isolation and stubborn resistance based on 17:1 and 18:19. We're going to have unyielding brethren. We're going to be dealing with things that are like castle bars that keep us out. So isolation and stubborn resistance are coming our way as a fruit of in our relationships. Escalation was mentioned earlier, 17:14. It's like the letting out of water. Things get worse, and we're going to lack mercy. We're not going to receive mercy, verses 19:19, because we are persistent in our flaws in that area. So did a bell actually ring? It did. Okay, both of them? Okay. I'm going to. A point that I'll finish on, which is getting to where Mark's comments. What are the root causes of anger? Why anger? And we've had several mentioned here already this morning, things that lead to anger. And one of the things I think that is one of the root things, and there can be several things. One of them is fear. A fear of loss of something is a key. a lot of things that we may mention that are sources of anger, when we boil them down, we find out what's the question behind the question, what we'll find is that there is a fear of losing something. It may be that I fear losing respect. Somebody says something that cuts me down in a way that I feel vulnerable, and I feel a loss of respect, and I may react because I'm fearful of losing that sense of respect. I may be fearful because of things I experienced in my upbringing, which has been mentioned. Maybe I had an extremely domineering father that I could not escape from. In however I tried to, I could never be right. I could never do something that pleased that person. And now when I'm in the workplace, or I'm in my marriage, or I'm with neighbors, and someone browbeats me or says things to me that make me feel incompetent, I fear scars that came from my upbringing. It brings out a fear that I'm about to experience this again, and people react, as Mark mentioned, they react. And Ben's back there jumping up and down, saying, "Shut up." No, he's not. Okay, so anyway, we need understanding, and that'll be our closing point, is we need understanding. We need to we need to be a listener, and we need to be someone that asks questions so that we can learn. Thank you so much for your input. Very good.